evolved over time. A lot of the evolution, I think, is fair to say, is due to evolving policy environments, probably more competition, more investment, a greater diversity of technologies, low-cost devices, and other things. So I think the WSIS certainly did provide the kind of the roadmap, and it certainly provided a very important set of principles that we are working towards and continue to and set up the IGF and other processes. But I think it's definitely a mix of economic development generally and also that kind of roadmap that the WSIS has provided. Thanks.
Hi everyone, this is Lea speaking. If I may just add on to what Matthew has just said and maybe take a bit more of a skeptical approach. Talking to a lot of people, especially those on the ground, you will hear that WSIS in fact has done very little to work towards a people-centered, inclusive, we have a video, inclusive and development-oriented information society. I think Matthew is right. It has given direction for implementation for national government, but the issue is that some of the targets that we have in the WSIS outcome, according to some, are quite difficult to measure. And without this indicators or benchmarks for measuring progress, implementation has been piecemeal and definitely not to the extent that it could have been had it had a more robust implementation framework, I think. Two things that I'd like to add to that. One, what it has done undoubtedly has been giving a mandate to different UN agencies to implement and facilitate parts of implementation efforts. I think that's very important. If anyone is following, for instance, what the ITU has been doing, a lot of its mandate in the last 10 years has actually been shaped around the framework that the WSIS has given it, as was one of the main facilitators of the WSIS action plan and implementation. And I think that's something that's gonna come back now in the review, right? So regardless of how different actors on the ground decide to take these implementing frameworks and the recommendations, whatever the review comes out, we would definitely influence how these UN agencies move forward. For anyone interested or concerned with mission creep, that's something to keep in mind. And lastly, what I'd like to say, in asking what the WSIS has done beyond this kind of organic growth towards connectivity and it has done as a framework, I think very importantly, it has been given a recognition to a model of governance that has not been, that is new and to a large extent original. And that's whether you call it the multi-stakeholder approach or a more open, inclusive, participatory way of governance in the space. That is something that the WSIS has given birth to via the IGF, so the Internet Governance Forum that's been established through the Tunis Agenda. And then as a follow-up and kind of trickling down from the global IGF as a birth of the various national and regional IGFs that have sprung ever since and still growing in number. So yeah, I'll stop there, and perhaps others have. I see if Wolfgang is online. That would be great to hear his perspective. I see Vladimir Radunović as well with us. So yeah, I'll let them speak if they have anything.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, can hear you. Thank you, Wolfgang, for joining.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. I think we should go back to the start of the WSIS. This was in the early 2000 years, when the internet was still an instrument for geeks and freaks. And I think the importance of WSIS was really to raise the awareness that the internet is a key element in social economic development, also cultural development, and in human rights for the 21st century. And I think one of the first targets for the WSIS was to do something against the growing divide in this field of the internet. We should not forget that in the early 2000s there was just 1 million or 2 million, 1 billion or 500 million people online. So to bridge the digital divide was the main point which was raised by the WSIS, and to create awareness for this. So if you go to the Millennium Development Goals, which were adopted in the year 2000, so the internet didn't play any role in these 2000 Millennium Development Goals. So it was the WSIS summit which really created the awareness that the internet could become a key instrument for reaching this Millennium Development Goals. And that's why now in the WSIS+10 review, it's so important to link the next 15 years in a continuation for the follow-up for the WSIS, closer to the to the Sustainable Development Goals, which has been adopted just recently by the General Assembly of the United Nations. And from this perspective, there were two key issues for the Tunis summit, and this was financing and internet governance. And if we look into the figures today, then we could say on the one hand, you know, some of the aims to bridge the digital divide has been achieved, because we have now nearly 50%, or would say 45% of the population which is online. So, but to bring the next billion internet users to the internet needs much more efforts, and that's why the issue of financing, which was discussed 10 years ago, is still in the agenda. Who will pay all this? And if you look into the drafts of the WSIS+10 review document, then you see that financing plays an important role. And here, you know, more has to be done to be creative, to mobilize new forms of for investment in infrastructure. I think these are still very important issues. And internet, the role of the internet and internet governance, the second key issue from Tunis. I think here we have made really big progress, that the principle of multi-stakeholderism, which was an innovation in Tunis, is now more or less accepted as the guiding principle for managing the internet. And the Internet Governance Forum is indeed a success. And so I'm happy to see in the draft that the community will renew the mandate for the IGF under the condition that more output is created. And I think this is what we all want to have. So I think the linkage to the Sustainable Development Goals, this is really should be in the forefront of the forthcoming meeting in New York. Thank you.
Thanks very much for that, Wolfgang. Lea or Matthew, do you have anything you'd like to add to that? Or if any of the participants would have any questions, please do put them in the chat.
Could I just add to what Wolfgang just raised, which I think is a key point, and I just put a note about it in the chat, which is we have an opportunity to really get back to the original goals of the WSIS back in Geneva in 2003, which really was, as I put in the chat, harnessing the potential of ICTs for development. We have a unique opportunity that we should be pushing very hard for, to more substantively link the WSIS programs that are developed post-2015, post the December meeting, whether it's the action lines or some variety of action lines, really link them very closely to supporting achieving the SDGs. As Wolfgang said, we kind of got a little bit off track from that with the Tunis phase of the WSIS, which, while important because it dealt with issues like internet governance and financing, it did tend to obscure the original premise of the WSIS and the original purpose of the WSIS. And I think there's quite a unique opportunity for us to really see that evolve further with syncing with the SDGs. Thanks.
Thanks very much for that, Matthew. I think Vladimir Radunović, you said in the chat that you might have something to add here. Please do go ahead.
Thanks, Aditi, and greetings to everyone. Well, great initial mapping. I just wanted to bring in. Usually, when I'm asked by the geeks and the computer guys of what the heck is the point with all these documents and global processes and diplomacy and stuff and drafts and whatever, and I try to somehow link it to or bring it down to their level, which is like when you do programming, you need to do a lot of codes about functions and procedures, right? And then at some points when you need those functions and procedures, then you get back to that and call upon them. You don't have to rewrite them because there is already something. And then you go up, and in that structure, you basically have a kind of a blocks of procedures and functions that you can call upon. You even have an operating system. That is more or less the similarity with the whole system of WSIS. If we go down to the local level, any kind of local policies about the ICT development is basically a procedure or a function. But then you have to call upon the bigger blocks, which are the international documents. And then WSIS, in that sense, is a kind of, or it may be an overstatement, an operating system to some extent. But it is a framework which can enable going down to the locals and developing local policies within some framework. Now, the two benefits that I see, one that you, or both of them you basically mentioned, one is the excellent mapping of the field of information society and then internet governance, of course, and in sense of helping the local and regional communities or decision makers to develop policies and help developing the ICT for development in their countries, in their regions. And the second one relates to multi-stakeholder approach. We can discuss to what extent there is still debate on who should have the leading role. Should it be governments, or should it be on equal footing, and so on and so forth. But the fact is, even in the first two phases of WSIS in Geneva and Tunis, you could see the difference. In Geneva, you could see mishmash of people which were even dressed differently, and they were not communicating with each other. The geeks were in T-shirts and shorts. The diplomats were in suits. In the Tunisian phase, you could already see a difference, even in dressing code. But the communication started happening. At the IGFs today and in the WSIS+10 communications, you can see, if nothing, then a great discussion, great level of discussions where diplomats and policymakers are trying to listen. They realize they don't know enough. They're trying to listen to the private sector and civil society because they can benefit. And on the other hand, the non-diplomats or the non-government sector figured out that there is something in diplomacy which makes sense, not only the procedures, but a whole set of, as I said, framework and building up these procedures and functions. So in that sense, multi-stakeholder approach, to me at least, really showed up to be practical. It's not just a bumper sticker. It's actually happening. I think it's a good benefit. Thanks.
Thank you very much for that, Vlada. I see that Wolfgang has made a comment in the chat. Wolfgang, would you like to elaborate on that, or should we open the floor maybe to some participants?
More or less, I just wanted to support what Matthew has said previously, and it's better to invite the participants for more questions.
Okay, well, let's have a look. Let's see if anybody has any questions so far. Please feel free to unmute your mic and ask a question if anybody has one. All right, then, Wolfgang, maybe you should elaborate on your point, and we can see whether anyone has
nobody has a question, then I want to raise this one point I have in my comment in the chat, and this is the risk that the meeting in New York in December becomes occupied by open questions around the internet. As we remember from Tunis, the issue of internet governance is rather controversial. We have two different camps. one camp which says the internet should be managed by an intergovernmental oversight body, and others say the internet is better managed by the multi-stakeholder mechanism which have in place with the IGF, with ICANN, with the Net Mundial Initiative, with a number of other technical and other organizations, so as a distributed system. So, and as you are aware, at the moment there is this big discussion around the so-called IANA transition within ICANN, where the US government has announced that they will terminate the IANA contract if the multi-stakeholder community demonstrates its ability to, take the IANA functions in their own hands. As you remember, in Tunis, the special role of the US government was heavily criticized, and there are some paragraphs in the Tunis agenda which more or less invite the US government, to terminate the IANA contract. So, and insofar, you have to have an eye on what is going on within ICANN. And so there is a certain risk if the IANA transition is postponed, delayed, or even will fail, that this could trigger a rather political controversy in New York, where then governments say, okay, we have waited now for 10 years that the US government terminates the IANA contract, and we are not ready to wait any longer, and so we have now to start a process for the introduction of intergovernmental mechanisms for the internet. So the buzzword for this, or let's say the diplomatic language for this issue, is the so-called enhanced cooperation process. So people remember in Tunis that there was a proposal made by the European Union to establish a new intergovernmental council, which was watered down and was reflected or translated into a so-called process of enhanced cooperation, where nobody knew exactly what enhanced cooperation means, but the understanding of some governments was very clearly that they say in the end of such a process of enhanced cooperation, we want to have an intergovernmental body which oversees the technical functions of the internet, including domain names, IP addresses, protocols, and all the things. So this is, I think, an important point, and I would really invite everybody to work towards this New York summit should not be occupied by this internet issue, because these are two different things. We have achieved a lot with the Internet Governance Forum. We are in the process. Probably the IANA transition takes more time than expected. So, and we should not fall into this trap and accept, if there is a certain delay, that now, the governments could do it better. It's very clear that a multi-stakeholder process takes more time and is more complex than a one-stakeholder process. So the governments are involved in the IANA transition. There are 153 members in the Governmental Advisory Committee, and it would be absolutely disastrous if some governments would start a fight around internet in New York. Insofar, I encourage everybody also to talk to their own governments and to say, the process for the IANA transition is in good hands. It moves forward. It's slowly. But an alternative in form of a new intergovernmental council would not be the answer to the challenges we will have today and tomorrow in this field of the internet. Thank you. Back to you.
Thanks very much for that, Wolfgang. We have a few comments in the chat. I think let's go quickly to Vlada first, and then we'll go to Martha Giraldo, who has sent a private comment, which I think she can share with the group as it's a question. All right, Vlada, if you'd like to go first.
Yeah, it's just building up of what Wolfgang said. It's just distinguishing between the ICT and internet, which shows up in different documents. Like in the very recent zero draft of the WSIS+10, you have about 50 occurrences of ICT and about 15 of internet. It's not just a linguistic difference, it's a political difference where the ICT is a kind of retro language which links to the UN work, and if you wish, the ITU mandate is rather linked to the ICT than to the internet. So in that sense, it's exactly what Wolfgang mentioned. It makes a difference what language is used and what term is used as well, and that drives the discussion in a way. So we should be cautious about the terms that are used as well. Thanks.
Hi, this is Lea, everyone. If I just may add on this point before we move on, I think, I completely understand and I agree with what Wolfgang is saying, and I see Matthew agrees as well. I think, though, the problem there, and it's important to understand the motivations behind why people want to discuss internet governance, right? And I think it goes beyond just the discussion around the IANA transition and what's happening with ICANN at the moment. And although that may have been the main driving force around that discussion in 2004, 2005, at the moment when you talk to governments, especially those in the G77 who are pushing for greater government involvement and who want to see progress on enhanced cooperation, what they say it's not just about technical governments. What they're interested in addressing is the perceived geopolitical and economic disparity in the world that they see as an underlying cause that stops the equal distribution of benefits, of ways that we harness ICT4D. And I'm not saying that I'm in favor of talking about internet governance, because I do think that will unnecessarily geopoliticize the debate, but I'm not really sure if that's something we can avoid. If you look at what's happening now, and if you read the contributions and the discussions on the zero draft and on the previous draft, the non-paper, it is very much going in that direction. I think what we need to think about is how do we address these arguments then if we are actually thinking about achieving the people-centered, open development, inclusive and development-oriented information society, and how do we leverage the debate around internet governance so that it benefits the broad discussion around ICT4D. I don't have an answer for that. I'll throw it back to the group, but I do think that if we're talking about shaping the positions of governments, we need to understand where they're coming from. And I think just saying, oh no, just focus on ICT4D, we need to go back to development, I don't think that's going to be enough. So yeah, thanks. I just want to share that with the group.
May I make a comment? So I think you are absolutely right that so-called public policy related internet issues are under the supervision of the governments. And ICANN, for instance, is very, very careful not to enter these fields like data protection, freedom of expression, content control, and things like that. I think ICANN is not the content police of the internet. So it's very clear that this public policy on human rights, on intellectual property, on network neutrality, all this, will be on the agenda. So that means I do not argue in favor of a meeting in New York ignoring the internet issues. But my problem is that if you move this discussion into an institutional framework as it was proposed by the G77 and China to have a new intergovernmental body, so this would be a step backwards. So that means we should really separate two things. One is the IANA transition in ICANN should not be discussed in New York. And the second thing, if we talk about new frameworks or mechanisms for the internet, then these new frameworks and mechanisms should be follow the multi-stakeholder model. As the IGF has demonstrated, that this is the best way to come solutions. So that means a way backwards to create a new intergovernmental body would not be the solution. So that means you have to translate the experiences from the multi-stakeholder debate in the very narrow technical field now into the broader political field. This is a big challenge and will take another 5 or 10 years, but this is the only way forward. Just to go backwards and to say, okay, now for all these political issues, we create a new intergovernmental mechanism. This will not be the answer. That means if it comes to internet-related public policy issues in New York, then and they are looking for an institutional framework, then such a framework should be based on the experiences we have with the multi-stakeholder model. And this could be done on top of the IGF. So the IGF has paved the way for the future, and we should learn from the IGF and make the IGF better, and can add something on top of the IGF, which can be also a mechanism. But a purely intergovernmental mechanism will not help.
Would any of the other panelists like to add anything to that? All right, well, thanks for that. We have a comment just now from Gangesh Verma. Gangesh, would you like to speak to the group?
Yeah, hi, am I audible?
Yes, hi, I can hear you.
All right, so I was just thinking that the fact that the entire internet governance issues are focused on ICANN and IANA, but it is also linked to the larger multi-stakeholder model or the faith in that system. So although we don't want the internet governance debates to dominate the entire WSIS discussion, to not include it or to completely avoid it would also jeopardize our understanding of multi-stakeholderism, and the way the process in which we are actually conducting the WSIS review might be jeopardized if we try to sideline the fundamental internet governance debates. Did that make, would any?
Sure. Thank you for that, Gangesh. Would you like either any of the panelists to respond to anything particular in your question?
Could I respond?
No.
Sure.
Yes, please.
I think you're absolutely right. You know, we have a situation where we realistically have to address internet governance issues. We cannot expect this process not to address them. And I think that is in a way it's burdensome, but in another way it's also necessary. Where I find the evolution of thinking from the 2003 to this zero draft, which has just been released, what we're seeing there, I think, is a very interesting evolution over the period, because we've seen language in this latest version, the zero draft, that clearly comes from and clearly outlines some of the goals of the Geneva phase back in 2003. And many of those issues, particularly those related to development, are as pertinent today as they were back in 2003. That's not to say that we haven't made progress, but they still remain as important as ever. Some of the issues that came through the Tunis phase, so for example, the Internet Governance Forum, the notion of enhanced cooperation, the growing understanding of this roles and responsibilities of various stakeholders has kind of morphed into multi-stakeholderism. I think the new draft does reflect a greater understanding and a greater acceptance of that evolution, and the notion that policy processes should be open and inclusive and transparent, which I think most of us would probably agree with. So I think there's been an evolution of over time that towards a more elaborated understanding of what internet governance is and what the multi-stakeholder model, if we're going to call it that, is, and how that plays out in the internet governance space. What interests me is perhaps less the continuation of the internet governance dialogue, which I absolutely agree we will have to have and we will continue to have, but the increasing focus on subject areas that have come to the fore, such as cybersecurity. And we're seeing echoed in the new draft calls for greater cooperation at the international level on cybersecurity issues, which we've been seeing elsewhere in the UN system as well. So I think that's perhaps taking the governance issues and moving them into more specific subject areas will certainly generate lots of interesting discussion in December in the UN, and could very well result in further items being developed post-December. And that's what I think is very interesting about how this governance debate has evolved over time. Thanks.
Oh, just to quickly add on to what Matthew is saying, and sorry to speak again, but I think that's really important if we're thinking about how we move the IG discussion forward. And for those of you who have participated in Net Mundial last year, you know that the one step forward that was taken in terms of internet governance frameworks was the text and the language around roles and responsibilities, which said that roles and responsibilities should be seen in a flexible manner, and I think it was have to be adapted to the issue at hand. And at the moment, we don't have that in the Tunis agenda. That's something that has evolved since. And I think for public interest groups involved in the discussion, this could be an excellent kind of argument to push forward, that we need to actually go into specific issue areas and see how the roles and responsibilities apply, rather than just having a one-size-fits-all approach, which I think as a role of learn just doesn't work.
Thank you for that. If no other panelist has anything to add, we have a couple of questions from participants, which I'd like to go to. Is that all right? Okay, all right. So I think Martha Giraldo from Colombia, she's been waiting patiently while we talk about the sort of IG element. Martha, would you like to unmute and then ask your question to the panel?
Okay, yes, thank you very much. Do you hear me?
It's quite quiet. Would you be able to turn your volume up?
Okay, wait a minute. Okay, now? Better now?
It's a little better, yeah.
Yeah, okay. Thank you very much. Thank you, Aditi. Nice to meet you here. Yes, I live here in Colombia, and I'm on the south, of course, and I know the situation here might be similar to many other countries. We've been working really very hard as a country on having all the connectivity and all the infrastructure. We have now we'll have 1,200 libraries on position with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation grant that we received, and we are the last minister did very good connecting all the municipalities on this country. So we have a lot of infrastructure, a lot of connectivity, but I'm really worried about how to really. I mean, I know these people in these municipalities, if they go to to this infrastructure, they will find an algorithm, a commercial algorithm to find the information they need, and they will never find it. So my question is, knowing that content that goes to the internet falls into that big ocean, which grows exponentially in quantity of data, information, local contents, so my question is, what is needed to help people fishing for the information they need to contribute for their own development? I know people, if they find the information they need, they will really work on their own development, and they don't have to wait for nobody else working that much on that. So I'm very much interested in local content production, but there's not that much incentive when you know that that information flows into that big ocean, and it's so difficult to access it again and to share it with others in the country that would be very much interested in. So I don't know, it's really a question. I don't know what should be done, if it's about the internet infrastructure, if there's something to do there, or is it about having a social-driven search algorithm? algorithm, or is it about recommending country policies for developing local applications to link the local information, or is it about hosting, or is it a mixture of all of these things? I really don't know, and I really would like to know your vision about this thing.
Thank you very much for that, Martha. Would anyone from the panel like to give that a go?
Aditi, I can try.
Okay, great. Thank you.
It's an excellent question, and it absolutely fits in the probably in an overlap of this broader topic of ICT for D and internet governance in the sense of public policies. It's usually linked to the question of access, even though access is mostly concerned with physical access and costs and stuff.
Yeah.
But more and more it turns into the question of local content, because there was some research questioning the people that are not connected to the internet, non-users, why are they not using the internet? And guess what? The response was dominantly not, we are not connected, we don't have a connection, or we don't have money, but we don't know what to do with it. Why would I connect to internet? So in that sense, creating a local content is more than necessary. Your question, where to put it, or where to foster these policies, is a good one. I think WSIS platform in general and SDGs is a kind of a meta space where these issues are definitely well placed. But more concretely, I know there are a lot of NGOs. There is also International Federation of Library Association and IFLA, and the whole UNESCO platform, which deals a lot with diversity content and stuff. So that is maybe where I would look for more kind of pushes in this direction. But again, WSIS and SDGs are the place on a meta level to do this as well. I'm not sure I managed to respond. It's quite a broad area, but you're on the right track.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Yes, I'm very much very close to IFLA. They helped me to participate on the last IGF Internet Governance Forum. But really, this was the only one institution, and some others. But this was a very small. I think discussions about this aspect, and IFLA is more really thinking about libraries, how to help on this. But I really think there's something to be done over libraries, because for librarians and for people on libraries, the problem is the same. I mean, they will help among them to really develop capacities and all these things, but capacities for what? If information is so difficult to find out up there. So I think something over that has to be delivered or developed, and again, I don't know if it's a policy, a national policy, or is it a platform, or is it an algorithm, a better algorithm, or whatever is it. But yes, I've continued working on this, and I really haven't found a place to talk about this profoundly and look how to help this country to really take advantage of all this infrastructure. And of course, libraries are wonderful places for working with helping for that, but I don't think they are the answer I'm looking for. Thank you very much for your answer anyway.
Hi, this is Lea. If I just on Martha's question, and thank you, Martha, for raising this. In a number of sessions and kind of events that I've attended over the past couple of months, there just seems to be a lot of agreement around the fact that we can't, in terms of increasing access, it's not enough just to talk about infrastructure rollout. We really need to now focus on what it means to meaningfully use ICTs, right? So it's not enough just to build out the wires. And, so you're definitely right that that's an important thing to consider, and I think the WSIS gives us an opportunity to strengthen that point. One practical place or avenue that I would recommend people interested in these issues look at is actually the IGF. The IGF, the Internet Governance Forum, offers a platform for any and all of these issues to be discussed. There are almost 100 workshops in the IGF, and I don't know now specifically whether there's one on local content, but I'm pretty sure there will be. So I would just recommend that you look at the IGF program and whether that's something that's addressed there. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Lea.
Okay, thank you for that, Martha. Do any of the panelists want to add anything to that, or we can move on? Okay, well, the next question that we have is from Michael, and this is: the Chinese are an important player in the WSIS discussions. What do you think their top priorities are? Are any thoughts on why the Wuhan Internet Summit planned for October 28th to 30th was just postponed?
Hi, before I'm leaving, because I have to leave in around 5 minutes, this is Wolfgang. I can take this question because I have some conversations with Chinese colleagues, and I will also go to Beijing for the European-Chinese cybersecurity consultations, which take place just after the Dublin meeting. So my impression is that China has here a double strategy, as they had already in Tunis. So their first priority is to get a confirmation of their so-called national sovereignty over the cyberspace. I think this is in the Tunis agenda, paragraph 63, which says that no country should interfere into the national domain name space of another country. And I think this is what China expects, that they, would block any interference into their national affairs, so that they can do what they think it's right for them, including measures to protect the national security via censorship measures and things like that, we know. So on the other hand, I think China is not interested in a closed and internet, or in the fragmentation of the internet, because, with the growing economic dimension of the of internet companies from China, or if you take Alibaba, if you take Baidu, if you take Weibo, and a lot of these others, so all this, big Chinese players have an interest in an, let's say, open internet. And that means while they have grown nationally in the last 10 years, their perspective is now to extend this growth into the international sphere. And insofar, though there could be an interesting coalition, so of basic strategic interests, between the United States and China, as it was reflected in the recent agreement between President Xi and President Obama, when they signed a treaty to avoid economic espionage in the field of cyberspace. So, and I think this is probably a very delicate balance here, that on the one hand, so we have certainly different national interests. On the other hand, we have also common interests. And so I do not expect that China will use the WSIS 10 Plus Summit to push for their national interests. They will certainly watch what will be the outcome. And my expectation is that the postponement of the Wuhan conference is also resulted in the recognition that the timing was bad for the Wuhan conference. Too many things are unclear, the YANA transition, WSIS 10 Plus, and some other processes. So to wait and see, and then to have a big conference in China is probably better for them. And in the meantime, they are very active. They will come to the Dublin meeting, you know, with a high delegation, the Cyberspace Administration of China, the so-called CAC, with Lu Wei as minister, is very sensitive to all these issues. So they are a big player, but they will play this double role. On the one hand, to protect the national interests, in particular the security interests, but on the other hand, they will not work towards a fragmentation of the internet or closing of the internet. They need the open internet for in the interest of their own economic development.
If I could just add to those excellent words by Wolfgang, there is a subtle change that's occurring amongst in some nations, and the way that they are presenting and talking about some of these internet governance issues. I think it's fair to say that India and China we're seeing some subtle changes in that regard, where we're seeing increasing references to, for example, multi-stakeholderism and multilateralism not being in opposition. In other words, and references to the importance of all stakeholders. I think Wolfgang put his finger on it, I think, very much so, which is that countries for whom internet growth and development is so important have nuanced their geopolitical views on internet governance, because they recognize the importance of the internet and some of the fundamentals of its architecture and the way that it's managed. That doesn't mean to say that, on the other hand, as Wolfgang said, that they don't have very different perspectives when it comes to the internet and policies relating to the internet at home, but I think certainly we're seeing a more nuanced approach internationally. Thanks.
Thank you for that, both Wolfgang and Matthew. Wolfgang, thank you for joining us. I know you have to leave, and we're very happy to have you come and speak with us here. So, Mike, do you have anything you'd like to follow up with in terms of your question? Feel free to unmute.
Sorry it took a minute to do that. That was a very good explanation of China, and my follow-up question was going to be the question that Matthew started to ask, which is, how is India influencing this debate, both in terms of pushing their own proposals and in trying to get other developing countries to work with them to achieve their goals at WSIS. I mean, if anyone has any other thoughts on India, obviously it's not quite as many internet users as China, but even more people and even more need.
I would hazard, if I may, it's a great question, Mike. I would hazard guess that the same drivers and the same motivation for this nuancing, as I was referring to before, are playing out with regards to India and its, its perception that it will be a major and will be an even greater economic powerhouse in the future, and so much of that growth and future opportunity will be internet and ICTs dependent, and I think this is what's causing, some of this little shifts that we're seeing in the way that these countries are talking about internet governance generally. Thanks.
But in India, we have seen some proposals for data localization, both at the ITU and more recently in national law. So partly because of the Mumbai bombing, there's certainly a sensitivity and a desire to make sure they can do surveillance on anybody and everybody in India.
If I may add to this, I think this is a fascinating question, and I think NSC Gangesh has made a comment that's really pertinent in saying that the government pursuing both approaches in terms of multi-stakeholder and multilateral approaches, and that is very similar to what Brazil is doing, if you've been following the Brazilian position. And both of these countries are incredibly influential within the bloc of the group of 77, right, the G77 bloc. within WSIS review negotiations. So their positions are very important here. One thing that's different for these countries, and I think for all countries in terms of new challenges that have emerged since the original WSIS summit, is the issue of cybersecurity. And Wolfgang and Matthew already hinted to that effect in talking about China, but a similar logic applies when we talk about India and Brazil and other countries as well. And if I may offer just a comment on that, where I see a sort of a dangerous tension rising there that I'm not sure if people are aware of, that on the one hand you have discussions around norms around cybersecurity that are very much dominated with the principle, dominated by the principle of national sovereignty, of non-interference, and the discussions are taking place in spaces that are very almost completely government-led and are very closed in terms of non-governmental participation. So on one hand, you have that happening, and there are norms that have been emerging in the past years through the GGE. That's a group of governmental experts within the first committee of the General Assembly. So we have almost a maturation of norms around cybersecurity. And then in parallel, we've had a maturation of norms around internet governance that have been imbued with these ideas of multi-stakeholderism, openness, inclusiveness, transparency. And when you put those two together on a piece of paper, to me there's an inherent tension there that I don't think that people have figured out how to resolve. How can we apply the principle of national sovereignty in a space that does not recognize national borders? We haven't figured it out. I don't think the WSIS will figure it out. When we read the zero draft that's currently out, I think it reads very inconsistently because of that. There is a whole section on cyberspace, or I think now it's capacity building in ICBs or something like that, very much aligned with the C5 action line of the Tunis agenda, that talks a lot about national sovereignty. But then, like looking in the section on internet governance, it talks about openness and transparency. And I think that's something that tension is going to be the tension for years to come, not just the WSIS. And I think that's something that countries like India and China, but also the US and others will have to deal with.
Thank you for that, Lea. Do any of the other panelists have anything to add? I'm conscious of the time. It's been a really great discussion. I think maybe just have closing remarks if any of the panelists have anything to add.
Nothing in particular, thanks, but it's been a pleasure, and I think, as Lea said, the zero draft really merits very, very close reading. There's a lot in there that's good. If we're overly concerned about some of the internet governance and some of the cybersecurity and possibility of summits down the road, we just need to bear in mind that there's a lot of excellent language in there as it relates to business practices, investment, human rights, enabling environments, the digital divide, and ICTs. So the analyses that come out on the zero draft, and when you look back at Tunis and Geneva, I think will give us a really interesting insight as to how thinking across the UN system, and certainly for those who have contributed, has evolved over time. So anyway, it's been a pleasure. Thanks.
Thanks, Matthew. Well, Lea's just put in the chat asking if the panelists and the participants would be happy to keep going for a bit. It depends on your timing.
I'm happy to go on for a little bit if people have other questions.
Sure. Does anyone in the participants have a question? Please feel free to put it forward. All right, well, Vlada has a quick comment on the zero draft. Please do go ahead.
Thanks. Basically, building up on what Matthew said, the zero draft is okay, the first kind of a draft of the outcome document, and it helps us get the idea of what might be the direction of or some new issues on the agenda there. And there are a couple of we're putting up the blog now. It'll be up by the end of the day, I hope. So I'll send you the link, the Digital Watch. But what we found, a couple of things, is that the development will again be in the focus much more than maybe before, when I can kind of cut into the agenda as well. The government seems to get more higher prominence, as it seems that this kind of respective roles and responsibilities might be more clearly now defined as governments are in lead, but still the multi-stakeholder approach is quite strong in the document. The news is that international law applies to the internet is kind of embodied in this zero draft. Net neutrality, that's very interesting. Net neutrality for the first time ever is in the document per se as net neutrality, not openness, not something like that, and clearly as a protection of net neutrality. Probably Brazil might be the one who was pushing that. We can look into the submissions, but that will be interesting to look at. And then this interplay between the ICTs and internet is also quite interesting. I'll send you the link. Oh, okay, Aditi, you sent it already. Yeah. So that's basically the link where you can follow up on Digital Watch, always the updates about the WSIS+10 and the WSIS process. And as I said, I think by the end of the day we'll issue kind of a snapshots from what we found in. But you're more than encouraged to look yourself into the zero draft and see some things that we might have missed. Yeah. Thanks.
Great, thanks for that, Vlada. Does anyone from the, we have one question from Mike Nelson. Mike, would you like to unmute and ask the panel?
Yeah, I was just going to ask about startups, and particularly my company, Cloudflare, is a 5-year-old startup, and we're one of the very few startups involved in this whole discussion. And if you look at the WSIS language, there's not a lot of talk about the need for new businesses and small businesses and individuals just be able to make money on the internet. Any ideas on how we can change that? Because capacity building needs to include the infrastructure, the talent, the capital, human capital, so that small businesses can start up and do new things and help build the internet in their country.
Mike, is that part of the discussion on enabling environments? There's a section on that, isn't there?
Lea, sorry, you just cut out there. Maybe repeat what you said?
Oh, sorry. And I see Matthew has said a similar thing. I'm really not an expert in this area, but I kind of see that might fit that discussion under the discussion around enabling environments that's part of the zero draft discussion.
Yeah. Usually that discussion though is about enabling environment and telecommunications regulation. They're not getting to the other issues that stand in the way of startups getting started. I mean, a lot of them that don't relate to standard telecom policy. But Matthew, you had something to add?
Yeah, I think this is a really important point, actually, Mike, and I'm glad you raised it. It's something that in CDT's submission to the earlier drafts that we tried to emphasize quite a bit, which is that if you think of the bigger picture and the importance of ICTs to the SDGs, what we really need to be seeing is thriving local entrepreneurship and innovation, because it's only really at the local level that some of these issues will be best addressed. Achieving the sustainable development goals in different parts of the world will require different kinds of efforts, and I think enabling environments, not just the telecoms space, but environments that have certainty of investment laws and competition and all those kind of things, and importantly, provide the kind of skills that will allow innovation and entrepreneurship to thrive, I think will be absolutely essential. So I think that linkage to achieving the SDGs and the role of ICTs and innovation and the role that innovation can play in that is a kind of a good way of looking at that challenge.
Yeah, policymakers in less developed countries as well as in Europe and the U.S. care a lot about jobs, and many of them are generated by the startups. But unfortunately, a lot of the discussion about the enabling environment seems to be focused on encouraging multinationals to make foreign investments into less developed countries, when there's actually a lot that can be done locally because the infrastructure is now so cheap. For the cloud, if you have the talent and you have the idea and you have the willingness to work really hard, you can get some pretty impressive apps running very quickly for almost no money. But anyway, this is a bigger topic that I hope will get more attention across the board with the SDGs.
Thanks, Mike, for your question, and thank you, Lea and Matthew, for your responses. So I see that Gangesh has asked another question. Gangesh, would you like to unmute and ask a question?
Yeah, hi. I was just wondering if the language on enhanced cooperation and other multi-stakeholder devices that have been part of the zero draft, do you see the language starting to, I think earlier someone had discussed that the roles and responsibilities are becoming more clearly articulated. Do you see that articulation being restrictive, or is it becoming more fluid?
I think, yeah, that basically is related to what I mentioned, is the reading of, but I encourage you again to read the zero draft. Our impression was that it's kind of more clear, or more emphasized at least, that respective roles and responsibilities is linked to the role of the government. It doesn't say that multi-stakeholder is not in game anymore. It is. And even in the document, it's mentioned too many times now. Multi-stakeholder is mentioned mostly when it relates to already or to previous kind of events, the UNESCO conference, the WSIS process, the IGF, and then in maybe 2 or 3 instances it is mentioned as a recommended format of future discussions. But it seems like, at least again, it was our impression that when it comes to roles and responsibilities, it was more linked or more used in those terms which are related to the stronger role of the government, like the security aspects. And by the way, the security aspect seems to be drifting now more and more into national security. It's not mentioned there, but basically into the stronger role of governments, where the cooperation and multi-stakeholder model is mentioned in the field of cybersecurity. It's cybercrime, but not cybersecurity. And then cybersecurity drifts more into the responsibility of the governments to protect national security and citizens, which is, by the way, in my opinion, a little bit of a threat, because it is the secure internet which can bring national security as well, not vice versa. So that's maybe something to look into more closely. But again, our impression was that language on responsibilities was a little bit more now attached to governments and kind of clearing out this dilemma that was dragging throughout the enhanced cooperation process, the CSTD and so on. But I'll be happy to hear how you find it, all of you, now or later.
This is Lea speaking. Can you hear me? I do think that so looking at the text of the zero draft, so Vlada's right. This is mentioned in a couple of. You can pick up the language on roles and responsibilities in different parts of the document. But it's very clear in the section on I think it's on internet governance, where it goes back and refers back to the Tunis agenda, understanding of roles and responsibilities, which a lot of people find restrictive, and it doesn't really give the nuance that I was talking about earlier in talking about the roles and responsibility of different actors being understood in a flexible manner and according to the issue under discussion. Secondly, in the section on enhanced cooperation, I think Vladimir, unfortunately, is right. You know, it's very clear now that what is being talked about here is about the role of governments. And I was sitting in a number of discussions in the working group on enhanced cooperation that CSTD was heading a couple of years back. And at the time, that wasn't clear. And part of the reason why the working group hasn't come up with recommendations, as I'm sure most of you will know, like there was a working group that actually wasn't really closed. Its work was never completed. It came up with this mapping of internet-related public policy issues and related mechanisms, but they couldn't come up with recommendations on how enhanced cooperation could be implemented, particularly because they couldn't agree on a definition of enhanced cooperation. But when you read the Zero draft now, it does sound like, as Vlada said, it's going in the direction of understanding that the enhanced cooperation, when we talk about it, is about the role of governments and does not really talk about enhancing cooperation among all different stakeholders. I think this is unfortunate. I think we can work on that language, and I do hope that the final outcome document has a more flexible understanding of roles and responsibilities.
Can I jump in here? I actually find the 2 paragraphs on enhanced cooperation a fascinating wording, because the first paragraph, and now we're really getting into the weeds, and I apologize for this, but the first paragraph is a very neutral acknowledgement of the fact that some things have happened, some things haven't, people have evolved a bit, organizations have evolved a bit, and reports have been written. The second paragraph is basically a rewording of, or if not mostly the same text from paragraph 69 and 71 of the Tunis agenda. And the word note in the first line, which says, and note concerns that their full information has not been achieved. But what I think is most telling is the last line of that paragraph, which says, in order to address these concerns, we call for an inclusive, democratic, and transparent dialogue on enhanced cooperation. So one can read too much into these things, but I'm seeing in here a very deliberate attempt by the co-facilitators to be very nuanced in the way they're talking about this, and very neutral. And yes, it clearly points to governments, but then again, it's only repeating texts that we've been dealing with for 15 years now. So I think the important line there is probably the last one, which talks about a slightly different way, a slightly different dialogue in an enhanced cooperation than those who are promoting enhanced cooperation might want. Just food for thought.
Thanks for that, Matthew. I think Gangesh has a follow-up question to that. Gangesh, would you like to take the floor?
Yeah, thank you, Matthew. So do you think that it's more like the idea of enhanced cooperation can still be developed and it's not as restrictive as one might imagine it to be?
Well, that's certainly my hope. But there's going to be a lot of iterations of this between now and December, so it could change very much. But I'm perhaps not as concerned about enhanced cooperation as I am about some aspects of cybersecurity in this particular draft, anyway. It's yeah, exactly. It's as Vladimir says, it's zero draft only, and who knows what's going to happen. But that's my hope, anyway. Yes.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks, Gangesh. Are there any questions from the floor, from any participants? Still have a couple of minutes before we can wrap it up, so please feel free. All right, well, any last comments from the panelists before, any last comments or remarks before we wrap it up?
So this is Lea. Maybe just to thank everyone for participating, and as a last note on my behalf, I would say that people who are interested in influencing the WSIS, I know that Aditi is going to mention this, we're going to have another Q&A about engaging in the process. but what we've heard from the co-facilitators recently is that the most effective way to influence the text of the zero draft at the moment is to submit your comments in a way that have very specific language edits or text edits on the zero draft, and they particularly value positions that are broadly supported. If people are interested in working on something together, we would also like to invite everyone to follow remotely the event that we're organizing this week in New York, Civil Society Coordination Meeting on the WSIS on Wednesday and Thursday. So it would be great to get your views, as I know we'll be working on some joint submissions into the zero draft later this week. Thanks.
Thanks very much for that, Lea. And everyone, thank you to all the panelists for giving their time for this, and to all the participants for being so great, so many good questions. It was a really good discussion. I hope you enjoyed it. As Lea said, the next webinar in the series is on how to get involved in the review process. And there's another Prezi, which I will give a link in a moment, and that will take you through the formal and informal opportunities available to get involved in the review process. Great. Thank you very much, everyone.
Yes, thanks very much.
Thanks.
Thanks, everyone. Bye. Have a good day. Bye.
So I'm just putting up the link for the next Prezi. It's just on the link on the PowerPoint bit here. The next Q&A session will be on Friday, 16th October. The time is still being finalized, but you can find all the information on the Global Partners web page. Okay. So I can give the links for this Prezi and the homepage in the chat as well. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Aditi. Bye.
Bye.